Hello and welcome to My Security TV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. My name's Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor with My Security Media, and today we're joined by Ches Rafferty, Managing Director and Co-founder of Scantek, a Perth-based company, but quite a good success story. And we're going to be looking at their ID processing and the introduction of vaccine certificates into their scanning platform. Lots to consider, but it's also good to reach out to Scantek as a successful Western Australian company over there in the WA market. Let's be joined by Ches Rafferty. Ches, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Chris. Always great to have a chat about our company and technology we're providing.
Very good, and safely over there in Western Australia. And we'll talk about your local market as well, but you are a national company and your vaccines. So maybe introduce us to Scantek. I like it when the name says a lot about the company already. And it's an interesting story in the background as well in terms of where you've come from.
Yeah, absolutely. So co-founded the company about 11 years ago with our CTO, Neil Bamber. Very much originally it was about providing an on-premise solution to do ID verification, really in the hospitality sector for reducing violence and antisocial behaviour in nightclubs and pubs. Still a core part of our business, but certainly we've expanded significantly from there. So providing our on-premise technology to things like Telstra stores. Every Telstra store in Australia has our technology, providing it up north in Western Australia for an alcohol harm reduction project with the Western Australian McGowan government. But also more recently, over the last sort of 12, 18 months, having a mobile cloud-based solution, which obviously during the COVID lockdown periods has been critical, allowing businesses to verify, are you who you say you are? And probably just as important about that, do you have the right credentials or the right level of trust to do business with you? So we certainly see that, I guess, really being the strong growth sector going forward. I think, as it's sometimes called, the great accelerator COVID, I don't think people are going to go back to as much face-to-face interactions, particularly for business processes that can more easily be done remotely or online.
With Scantek, so most of us, it's been a while since I've been at a nightclub, but the portals at sort of a nightclub as you go through, most of us will be familiar. You hand over your license and they scan your license and they take a photo image. That's the Scantek most people will know. But is that being applied, as you say, the Telstra stores? How's it working there? And is that for phone verification as they give you a new phone? How does that work? What's the difference?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's about verifying that people are who they say they are, and to obviously reduce the risk of potential fraud. In other words, someone might try and attempt to get a fake ID and then use that fake ID to get a expensive device off Telstra. So our technology has been brought in there to let everyone know that you're definitely who you say you are, and obviously if you're trying to do anything untoward, to alert the store that this isn't an ID that passes muster.
Yeah. So it's automatically checking sort of the bona fides of that ID, checking for if it's a false ID or out of date. It also captures that and puts it onto the database as well.
Exactly right. Yeah. So what our technology is able to do in our on-premise areas to actually do a really deep dive into the actual structure of that ID. And the way we do that is we actually capture that document in multiple light spectrums. So we're not just seeing it in visible light. And what you've seen, certainly, particularly what we've seen in the last 5 years, that in the visible light, in other words, just visually citing an ID, they're near on impossible to tell apart from fakes now. They're very sophisticated. But doing analysis on things like how the hologram appears and what might appear in other layers in infrared or ultraviolet light tells us a hell of a lot about whether or not that is a real document or whether it's one that's pretending to be a real document, but in reality is a sophisticated fake. But yeah, simple things as well, expired IDs. You want to ask questions why someone's got an expired ID, and also then to store that back into a database to make sure it matches with the information for setting up that actual account for that user.
Now that's a portal. Do you have a mobile application that can take an image and scan it that way as well?
Yes, so that's what we've really seen a lot of interest out of in the last 12 or 18 months since COVID's hit. We were developing that technology already because clearly there was it's been a strong move and continuing to be so of digital transformation projects, and it makes sense in our increasingly busy time constrained worlds. Having to go down to a physical branch or location to do a process is painful. It's also really expensive for the business user as well. They've got to have people there ready to serve them. And also what we do know, unfortunately, is training people to understand what real and fake documents like, to correctly collect the information off a document. And then also on top of that, many businesses want to or need to do other verification checks. So a banking sector, for example, where Oz track regulated entities, that could be also gaming or money exchanges, cryptocurrency exchanges. They have legal requirements to do additional checks to make sure that a person isn't on any anti-money laundering lists or counter-terrorism financing lists. What we've been able to do is, rather than have one system that collects, or a person that collects the data, and then a person that enters that into a database, and then another system that goes and does those checks, we're able to put that into an end-to-end process so that a user gets a text message or an email, or does it directly through a web site, scans their ID documents. They're not downloading any apps or anything like that, although we do have app-based technology for other use cases. Right. We do really smart analysis on that document. We extract the information off. We do facial biometric analysis to make sure they match the document. And we're also doing location and device analysis to make sure there's nothing suspicious about those devices. For the user, that's really quick. I mean, generally a user's complete on our process from a simple data collection of about a minute to a more complex multi-dot collection in usually 2 or 3 minutes. So as we like to joke, it's faster than you'd have to line up at most locations to see a human. It can be done 24/7. And then on top of that, we do all these back to source checks, depending on your industry, in mere seconds. So from a person getting that text link and then finishing that process, so a business can say, Chris, you can now have a new bank account or use our services. It can be as little as 5 minutes. So you're often seeing multi-hour, day, sometimes even week-long processes. We've compressed down to a 5-minute process. Now that is a game changer for many businesses, particularly in this increasingly accelerating world of I want services and I want them now and I don't want to wait. And how do you provide that in a way that de-risks a business? I think we believe we're actually a very unique company. Not just in Australia, we believe, and we've been speaking to a number of organizations around the world, that no one has seen technology like this anywhere in the world, all developed here in Western Australia, or in Australia more broadly, which we're really proud of.
Wonderful. How big is your team?
It's 42 at the moment, so it's been a really...
And all in Western Australia?
Primarily in Western Australia. We have one staff member currently outside, a national sales manager for our on-premise solution in Queensland. But we are in the process of expanding, particularly our sales footprint into the East Coast, into a number of key sectors. And obviously that's really about the fact that most of our national corporate companies are going to be based in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. That's the reality of it. So having people on the ground that can build those relationships. There hasn't been a lot of point, as you'd be well aware, over the last 18 months or 2 years of having people on the ground, because it's going to be Zoom every way you do it. But certainly,
you're not even allowed to leave Western Australia at the moment. Or if you might be able to leave, but you're not allowed to go back. But that takes us to...
It's like Hotel California.
You are definitely apart from just being the most isolated by distance city and state in the world. Definitely now most isolated. I think you must be. They call you the North Korea of Australia at the moment. Vaccine certificates, and this is another real business opportunity for you. Maybe talk us into what you're doing with the vaccine certificates on proof of vaccination.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, what we try and do is work with customers. So it was one of our sort of customers came to us and was sort of asking, we've got this problem. We've got to take all these tens of thousands of employees, and we've got to get them and send their vaccine certificates to us because of legal mandates, to make sure that they're vaccinated. So first of all, there's a massive, internal HR cost from the business of having to collect all these documents. Second, realistically, there hasn't been a way up until our technology developed for anyone to tell if the certificates are real or tampered with. So it's a visual site that looks like a real certificate, that looks like a real certificate. But unfortunately, what we know is that the fake vaccines or the tampered vaccine certificates, of course, they look real, otherwise people aren't going to accept them. The third one, and probably my personal bit that I'm most passionate about, is that these are quite sensitive documents. They're very restricted under the Privacy Act, as they should be. And people are unfortunately having to email and send through really insecure ways these certificates over. And they have an AHG number on it, which in simple terms basically should never be collected by a business. It's very, very sensitive. It sits under a different part of the Privacy Act around not just personally identifiable information, but sensitive personally identifiable information. So we sort of sat back and said, well, is there a way to do a back to source check? We can do that for a number of documents in Australia. Like, for example, we can query if a passport matches to a real passport. But at the moment, and again, it's fast moving, there isn't a way to actually do a back to source check unless you're a government. So that left us out and left all of our corporate clients out from do that. So the second question was, is there a way that we could be really certain that this document hasn't been tampered with? And what we have been able to do is develop some really exciting proprietary technology that actually analyzes the structure of how these PDF documents are put together. And what we can see is that if it's from the government data set, it's very clear that the structure is very consistent and the meta formatting is consistent. As soon as you make the smallest tamper, you create flaws through this meta structure. To you and me visually, they are absolutely identical. You could not tell them apart. I could send you over a certificate that would have your name on it. That's my certificate tampered, and obviously, other than knowing that it's not yours, you would not be able to tell it apart from your real one. What we're able to tell in mere seconds is that there's absolutely a flaw with this. Now, the flaw potentially could be legitimate. Maybe you've downloaded a PDF, taken a screenshot weirdly, and then saved it as another PDF. That's fine. We'll tell you need to upload another certificate. Or alternatively, if an employer saw continued behavior where they kept saying to someone, it's very clear, you go to MyGov, you download the certificate, you upload it through this process, you would know that you've got someone who's choosing not to follow their legally mandated requirement. And that's absolutely their choice, but it's also not their choice to continue employment there if they don't want to follow a legal mandate. And that's
this is where
my
the
opinion
risk,
on it.
Yeah, well, the risk of, well, fraud, for want of a better term, but using not real documents or counterfeit or false documents simply to keep your job, there's the motivations there. I think the other one is we had a brief discussion pre-interview, was the changes in the vaccine program. Now we're into the third dose booster, and this is not going away. We are going to continue to need vaccine shots into the future, 5 months, 6 months, and it's constantly changing. So this system will be built particularly for large employers, 20,000, 50,000 employees. How do you keep track of all of that? So this is a system to manage this.
Yeah, exactly. So what our technology will do, part of as it collects that information, as I said, it extracts information, because for a start, we need to ensure that, I haven't stolen your certificate, and we don't want something dumb like you asked to upload a legitimate certificate. I upload Chris. It just says, hey, it's legitimate, passes it. So we're making sure that the person it belongs to is real. So we do extract information off that document. As I said, we strip out the IHI number and we create a duplicate PDF with that information redacted. But also critically, we're extracting that vaccinated date. And what our technology will do is to say, all right, 6 weeks out, and this is the business rule, just pick it up. 6 weeks out, I'll start warning, Chris, you've got 6 weeks to get your third dose because you will not be considered fully vaccinated until you get it. 4 weeks out, it's getting urgent. 2 weeks out, early in the business as well. Look, you've got these employees that haven't had their second dose or haven't at least uploaded their certificate. And then managing that. And as you pointed out, the complexity is it was 6 months for a booster. It's changed to 5 months. You've got the New South Wales government asking for it to be 4 months. This is going to be a constantly changing process, and having to manage that along with everything else you're having to manage inside your business is going to be almost untenable for some certain size businesses, your 10s, 20s, 30,000s, or alternatively, you're going to have a team of 50 people sitting there whose job all day is to look at certificates coming in, upload them to HR products. It's going to be a literal nightmare. And of course, that's not even including the fact that if someone uploads a good quality fake, not using our technology, it's going to pass straight through. So you're not actually solving for the problem.
Yeah, it's the fakes will sort of find their way into the market where people are, if they're late, they might still have the intention, but if access to an easy fake is there, they'll take that road. It's definitely the way to go. One other sort of verticals are you really strong in, and maybe your scale. Are you looking to scale up? You talked about maybe national offices and sort of national expansion, but it sounds like this is a real opportunity that is sort of time dependent at the moment for you.
Well, yes and no. So one of our core sectors that we're getting a lot of interest in and we're growing strongly is what we call the right to work, right to study sector. And we see vaccine certificates fitting into that broader piece. So right to work is, for example, as an employer, are you an Australian citizen, which obviously entitles you to full working rights, or are you a potential resident under a visa condition, and does that visa entitle you to full working rights? Or if not, what restrictions are there? Some classic restrictions might be student visas, where you can only start working once you've started your study. If you arrive now and your university degree doesn't begin till February, you can't actually work, but from February onwards, you can work. And there's other elements for different industry sectors where different right to work conditions might need to be put on there. So for example, health workers must be registered on what's known as the AFRA database, which contains everything from nurses to chiropractors to doctors. Well, in that sector, we can query that as well to make sure you have the right to work there. Banking finance, you might need to make sure that you don't have any, again, money laundering, counterterrorism financing marks against your name. We can check that. So we see now vaccine certificates at least for the foreseeable future as being a key part. If you're not vaccinated, you're simply not going to be able to work in a number of sectors. So we don't necessarily see this as a standalone product, but more in a big sector that we're seeing a lot of interest and traction out of. So that's one. Certainly property services, we're seeing increasing interest around that. So that's everything from property settlement, mortgage broking, lenders. Obviously, we're still strong, as I said, in the hospitality, sector. We're seeing quite a lot of interest coming out of more and more government interest. The governments across Australia seem to increasingly have a mindset that they've got to be providing services at least as good as corporations can, which is a fantastic mindset change and something I'm sure most Australian citizens will be, looking forward to. But, I've seen even the last 2 or 3 years, a real paradigm shift from where the government, will provide services as we feel fit, to more where the government, and it makes sense for us to provide these services because it's actually cost efficient for us to provide better, quicker service for you. And then, of course, as I said, the banking, finance, and Austrac regulated sectors is always a huge market sector. And
sorry to interrupt, but I was just going to say, so you've pivoted quite well. Did you find a downturn early on in the pandemic due to all the licensed premises closing? Is the business model a subscription model where they could have just cancelled their subscription?
It is, yeah.
Right.
So I'd say less of a downturn and more of a plummet straight off a cliff. Certainly what it felt like at the time. It was a bit like the Roadrunner.
Got it, yeah.
Or the Coyote, I guess, not the Roadrunner. But look, certainly what we saw is a couple of things really helped. We had very clear direction from our board. The longer term success in these other sectors we knew were going to be strong. We felt at the time that COVID would bring to light a lot of these weaknesses or failings that people were using for onboarding employees, customers, etc. And particularly our mobile non-on-premise technology would grow strongly out of that. And then the third one that absolutely helped was the JobKeeper. That was an absolute, key part of our success. In simple terms, we had 21 staff just prior to COVID hitting. We unfortunately had to downsize, but we managed to keep 15 of our staff, again, in large part due to our board backing us and providing a short-term, funding bridging loan to get us through JobKeeper. But certainly, as I said, we've grown. By the end of the year, we were 25. So, in that sort of 9-month period, we not only managed to go down, but we managed to go back to even where we were larger than before COVID hit. And as I said, the last year has been a bit of a roller coaster. So we've gone from 25 to 2 staff. So I sort of jokingly describe this to some people as the worst roller coaster ride in the world, because it's just straight down and then basically straight back up again. So good way to give you a whiplash.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly stronger than ever. More as a key sectors we're looking into, but it almost feels these days like I can't have a conversation with someone without them going, hang on, I've got this problem in my business. Could you solve this? Because how do we identify this person? Or we've got this, but we don't know how to do it we've got it. It takes us 3 weeks now. And I'm like, well, with our technology, you could have that in 3 minutes or 15 minutes.
And maybe I'm getting to where you can scale. Is it simply a software download, a sort of sign up, and then the client manages it at their end?
Yeah, effectively, we will work, and again, we provide, I guess, a number of different outcomes. So we provide, for example, industry-based solutions where it doesn't matter who you are, you sign up, you get the same product effectively. It's custom tuned for your specific industry. So for example, one's property settlement agents or conveyancers. We've developed a product that you sign up exactly the same as everyone else because it does exactly what you need to do to meet your industry specific regulations and requirements. Very much like a nightlife solution. Here it is.
Yeah.
It works across the board. That having been said, we also do turnkey projects for some of our big corporate clients who might ask for everything for us to build, iOS and Android apps, have the technology that runs on it, to have the portal that they can access it in, to maintain the infrastructure around the security of and storage of that data for however long they need to do it for their compliance requirements. And that includes everything from project management, so we've got professional services all the way through. So we really sort of got 5 key sectors we're in, and 3 key sort of market size that we work in, and trying to provide the best solution for each of them. So you can reach out to us and say, it's an identity verification product, we're a big corporate, we want you to build it so it works exactly how we want to work, and we'll do that. But you could also be someone who says, I just want one of your off-the-shelf products. It sounds like exactly my industry. You can be up and set up and running in literally, minutes kind of thing. And then you, as you said, you manage it yourself. So you send out, new client comes on board, you send them a text message or email, says, I need to verify to move this forward. They do it. Big corporates plugged in their CRM. When someone comes on board, it triggers off an API call to our technology, gets all the information in a specific way they need it, does all the checks, and provides that outcome back into that corporate CRM product. So again, we've spent a lot of time building this platform solution to be really modular, and it's really exciting. We talk to big corporates. Sometimes they think there's a bit of startup hype on it, because they'll say, well, how long is it going to take to do this? And I'm like, it'll take 5 minutes. And they're like, no, but I want to change it from doing this to this. I'm like, you see us changing from that to that. I see it going to our system and changing the configuration of settings on there, and then our API infrastructure just builds that and outputs it. So I've had some sort of fun conversations.
Where have you put that, on AWS or Azure or on your own?
Currently it's AWS, but it is designed in a way, with Lambda functions that we could pick up with not a huge amount of work to put it into Azure, because we certainly expect, obviously, a lot of military, a lot of government contracts are running on Azure. So certainly we have the capacity to do it. We haven't done it yet, mainly because we haven't had someone specifically ask, but we spent a lot of time with our product really thinking about, to your word, how do we scale with minimal limitations? And the best way is to get that core technology and platform right, and then scaling becomes easy. So again, our product is actually a global product in the sense that it has no idea that a British passport is any more or less important than an Australian passport, or a US California ID card is any more relevant than a New South Wales driver's license. Now, to us, they're more important because that's where we are. But our technology just goes, well, I look at things, I determine what they are based on what my machine learning model training tells me. I extract the information based on other machine learning models. And the only bit that you need to then do that is location specific is to plug in these extra verification checks. So different countries have different back to source checks, and we're investigating what that looks like to plug them into our infrastructure. And in the same way, we would deploy that infrastructure into the correct AWS environment based on the domicile, so that you've got that data sovereignty, which we know is really important for particularly big businesses, but even small businesses are increasingly aware of data sovereignty and the risks around it.
Are you looking to bring on biometrics as well? I've seen one system that takes photos of the fingers and can pick up some fingerprints, and also your facial recognition.
Yeah, so sorry, I didn't really actually cover that, but we actually already do facial biometrics. So certainly our technology now allows us to capture images of you, or of a person on a device. What we're also doing is doing some confirmation to make sure that you're actually live and present. So for example, this video is going to go live. It would be simple enough for a person to steal my driver's license, which has my face on it, and then to go find a video of me chatting. to you or someone else. And of course, we all move our heads like this when we chat.
Yeah.
So what our technology does is it makes the user go through a unique series of head movements, which basically is an individual passphrase of, so, we'll say, look left and now blink and now smile and now look right. Next time you did it totally random, look down, look up, look left, look right, open your mouth, and so all these combinations. So we can see if a user's not doing that, those facial poses, and they're just moving their head around. We can be very certain that that's someone trying to spoof it with a video or some other kind of intelligent fake, 3D manipulation. So that's sort of where we're finding a lot of value, that, not just are you live and present, but also do you match up to those? And then of course, you can potentially looking at doing other biometric comparisons over time as more resources become available. So, that's a longer term piece.
And are you finding you're using open source? Or are you developing some of these algorithms on your own?
Almost all of our technologies are developed on our own, and part of the reason was not to say that we didn't look at what open source capabilities we could leverage. Certainly on our on-premise solutions, we actually do have a lot of customized open source solutions. Certainly what we found when we moved, and the reason that worked quite well was because there's a lot more control around the image capturing. So we know it's always the same level of lighting because that's provided by the unit that captures it. We know it's always a two-dimensional image. We know the camera resolution is always the same. Once we went out to the wild, you have an unlimited number of cameras, mobile devices. You have an unlimited number of background lighting sources. You have an unlimited number of ways that it three-dimensionally can have an ID document. We simply found that open source technology we weren't able to get it to work the way we'd hoped. And what we did was realized, and often machine learning gets spat out by a lot of businesses because it sounds cool, or AI. What we found was this was really a use case where machine learning really fitted the bill, and that was, we've got really complex issues. It's very hard for a human to make determinations or to develop code that could account for the number of different possible permutations, and to build machine learning models that could account for it. So a classic example, traditional OCR capabilities designed to read black text off white backgrounds. And that makes sense because virtually everything we read is black text off white background, whether it's a newspaper or a book, a paper. But ID documents are specifically designed to be hard to make fake copies of, and they have complex, noisy backgrounds. And what you'd see a lot was traditional OCRs reading, Western Australia written in janky text through the background as well as your names. You get like Ches West, Raff Turns, things like that. So what we were able to do is to use a type of OCR technology called Seen in the Wild, which is effectively the way that you and me read. And it's the way that things, for example, Google uses to read street signs where they have different backgrounds, or numbers of letterboxes, for example, which are different backgrounds, different configurations. And what that does is two things. A, you get a much better just information extracted, but it also means that you can train for all kinds of combinations and permutations you've not actually seen in the wild either. So you can kind of create your own augmented data sets, which has been really powerful. And the third bit, which has been great, is if we're relying on someone else's technology, we can't make rapid changes. If we see a flaw in the way that it works, sure, we can put a request in, we can talk to if it's open source, we can try and fix it ourselves, or wait for someone else who might have expertise in this. This way, we're in control of our own destiny, and that allows us, we believe, to do some unique, when we say we believe, from what we've seen and the market's telling us, technology that no one else in the world currently has right now. And that's purely because we've spent the time and effort to develop these models that do things that no one else has been able to work out how to do. So it's a pretty exciting opportunity for us as well. When people sort of see it, it's quite funny. I sometimes show people, like, we've already got this, or we've already seen this, and then you get this kind of wide-eyed look of like, oh, we haven't seen that before though. And sometimes the disbelief, which is my favorite. They're like, oh, that was really cool. Like, that was a really cool demo. We'd love to see how that actually works in the real production environment. Like, no, we don't do any demos at Scantek that's not in our production environment. What you see is what's being used in the real world today. And they're like, that, yeah. And sometimes they go, all right, give me your phone. I'm going to do my own ID. I'm like, okay. Scan their own ID. And like, that's all correct. It's like, well, that's the point. And not saying that OCR or everything's perfect every time, but it's very high pass-through rates, which most of our competitors don't have, and spend a lot of time trying to tell you why it can't be done. Well, we spend a lot of time working out how it can be done rather than telling the market, that it can't be done.
Very interesting. Well, look, ID processing, the main reason I reached out to you, Ches, was I saw the vaccine certificates being integrated into the platform, which I thought is a really opportune time. And it's good to see some businesses responding well to the situation around the pandemic. And I think it's a real opportunity for you. Plus, you're a West Australian business. I'm a WA boy originally. So it's always good to speak to a successful and growing Western Australian company. So Ches Rafferty, Managing Director and Co-founder with Scantek, thank you very much for joining us on our Tech and Sec Weekly.
Yep, really appreciate it. And of course, if any listeners want to find out more about technology, please do reach out to us. I'd love to give you a demo and let you play with that tech.
And that's scantek.com. So thanks, Ches. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you.